All right, we're live. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to all our Muslim siblings, and peace and respect to our non-Muslim friends
Wa
that
alaikum
have joined
salam.
us today. So today will be the continuation of the previous stream that we did with our Christian brother Adam in humanity. This will be a second part of the interfaith dialogue that we had with Adam that you guys probably saw on Dots Connected to Islam. In the first part, we talked about quite extensively about a couple of topics, and we did promise Adam that we will give him um, more of a chance to talk this time instead of us just yapping for hours and hours. We did talk about a coherent concept of God. We talked about what a true scripture of God should look like, how to distinguish it from the false ones claiming to be from God. We talked about the minimum characteristics a true prophet of God should have. And we also talked a little bit towards the end about the biblical scholarship. So today we're going to expound on the biblical scholarship aspect, talk about the crucifixion, how Jesus was viewed in the first couple of centuries, and if we get enough time, we will also talk about the Ebionites. So welcome, Adam. How are you doing, brother?
I'm doing really good. I hope everyone's doing good.
Doing great, alhamdulillah. And we will be joined later by Brother Faisal as well. And one of our other brothers, Brother Wassam, he'll be joining as well. The reason why, oops, okay. All of this. Okay, just 1 second. He just messaged me. I'm just confirming. Ali, go ahead. You can continue talking to Adam. I'll be back in 30 seconds. Let me confirm with Wissam what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else I could add on there, but yeah, I also do remember Adam. The last time during our conversation, at the end, I made some claims as well. Do you remember the claims that I made, or if I could repeat it to you later on because I wanted to give you a chance to. I wanted to give you a chance to actually, give your word and your agreement, your disagreement, etc., etc. Do you remember the claims that I made or something?
No, definitely, please repeat them.
Oh,
We did this 3 weeks ago at this point.
yeah, yeah, it's okay. So if I'm not if I'm not mistaken, I made a claim to you that if you look for if you're looking for truth, the only result is Islam because Islam is the only faith that actually not only tells you why God has to be one, but it tells you why every other religion has to, not that it's wrong because anybody can make that claim, but it gives you intellectual reasons why it has to be wrong. So so yeah, it's more about a guidance and a challenge that I pose. So at the end, I don't, obviously I don't want you to worry about that too much, but at the end, if you wanted to come and rebuke me or come and challenge that claim anywhere whatsoever, just you let me know, okay? Because I don't want to just make it out there. It seems like I'm like it's like a drive by. I'm leaving something and then running away with it. So I wanted to give you a
I
chance.
understand.
Okay, Adam. So yeah, unfortunately, our brother, I don't know, he got called into work, but I'm trying to connect with him to see if he can join us even a bit later, or
Yep.
even for about 40 minutes or something, because he's much more equipped to talk about patristics, right? So, inshallah, hopefully he'll join us. Okay. So in the meantime, we can discuss the other topics, right, without wasting any time. So, the death and resurrection of Jesus. Well, then you wanted to talk about it in light of Islam and other secular sources, extra biblical sources, right? Because we already know what the Bible says. So,
Yep.
okay. So, what would you like to discuss first? Do you want to know the Islamic perspective first? Do you know what we Muslims believe about the death and resurrection of Jesus, peace be upon him?
Well, I know it's partly tied in with Surah Al-Nisa, verse 157, but then obviously it's interpreting that verse as the issue, right? Because there have been, like, I've noticed, because I've listened to some different Muslim scholars when they've given an interpretation of that, and there's like a whole host of different interpretations. Like there's one interpretation which is like the substitution interpretation. Now that's not held by everybody, but some hold to that view. And then there's some other view which is something to the effect of he was on the cross, but he didn't die on the cross, and Allah kept him from dying on the cross, something like that, and then raised him up to himself. Yeah, that would be kind of the limit to what I would understand.
Okay, so basically, what you have to understand, Adam, is that we have certain hermeneutic principles when it comes to the interpretation of the Quranic text or even the Ahadith, right? So, this particular verse, what we know from the Quranic perspective as well as the Ahadith, the extent is very limited. And anything beyond that, if the Prophet, peace be upon him, himself, he did not give any additional information on this particular verse, we say Allahu Alam, meaning only God knows, right? Now, these different interpretations that you mentioned, these are what we refer to as the Israeliyats, right? That the people of the book, be it Jews and Christians, they had different theories, because you have to understand that Christianity, as we know it today, would be, you can sort of like define it. It still would be an umbrella term, because even within Christianity, you have different sects that have different books, and they have varying beliefs, be it the nature of Christ, be it the filioque controversy between the Orthodox and the Catholics, right? Or between the difference between Protestants and Orthodox and Catholics, etc. Then you have the Unitarians, you have Jehovah's Witnesses, etc., right? So, and of course, for each church, the other ones would be considered heretics, right? So that's a given. Now, how did Christianity begin, right? Now, that's a very difficult question to answer without looking into patristics, of course, and we have to look at the heresiologies that were written by these early church fathers, because as you might know, most of these works by heretics, they were either burned, they were prosecuted, they were persecuted, I mean, right? Or their works were burned, and they were not copied, right? Because why would you copy something that is made heretical by the quote unquote orthodoxy that actually won over, right? So be it Ebionites, be it the Nazarenes, be it the Gospel of Hebrews, all those extents, those all we know about them is from the writings of the church fathers, right? So basically they're enemies, right? We don't have access to any of these gospels ourselves, right? And over time, what happened to these people? Some of them, they moved to, let's say, Arabia, right? After Theodosius II, for instance. Some of them, they would have been forced to convert to the Orthodoxy, right? And the other ones were persecuted, or they got killed, right? So their works, they probably you cannot find them preserved. So it'll be very unfair to demand that show me exactly what the Gospel of Hebrews or the Gospel of Ebionites said, because it's not just me. It's this is standard scholarship about all of these heretic groups. We know very little about them, be it Gnostics. And Gnostic, again, is a very it's an umbrella term that even scholars don't use anymore. There are over 74 different sects of Gnostics, and they are varying from each other, right? So what we could do is let's start with what the Quranic perspective is. It's just, it says, like Surah Nisa, right, that he was neither killed nor crucified, right? That it was made to appear. So now, in what form was he substituted by somebody else, right? There is substitution theory, as you mentioned, right? But all of these different theories, right? Or he was replaced by, let's say, Judas. Was he replaced by one of his disciples, be it Simon of Cyrene, like the Basilidians initially thought as well, right? Or whatever theories that you could come up with, all of those are extra Islamic, right? Those are interpretations of other people, and we as Muslims, we don't have to take either one of them, and we still stay within the folds of Islam.
If I can just add on one more thing.
Yes, Ahi.
So, Adam, you mentioned how you've heard that some interpretations say that he was up on the cross, but he didn't, he didn't die, or he was just removed. That actually, that goes against the actual that goes against the what the Quran says, because uh, God says in the Quran he wasn't killed, nor was he crucified. Was it? So he separates the act of killing, the act of dying, and actually being crucified itself. So, because many people get this confused, that crucifixion itself is not dying on the cross. It's not, because you can be and because the act of crucifying, it's just hanging. When you excrete bodily fluid or bodily oily matter, when you're through hanging, that's what crucifixion is. And the Romans did not invent it. It was even practiced by the Egyptians more than 1,000 years before that. So that's what the definition of crucifixion is. Now, that process of crucifixion, or the process of crucifixion, can be done without dying from it. So that's why God says in the Quran, he separates being crucified versus dying from that crucifixion. So whoever or whatever people may interpret it as, oh, he was up on the cross, he just didn't die from it. Well, along it's goes along with what Fuad was saying. I just wanted to give the actual clarification on what it means to actually be crucified.
Yeah, I think the video that I saw, I can find it on YouTube and I can send you guys the link. But the guy that said that, from his perspective, he had interpreted crucified as death by crucifixion. So that's why he came to the conclusion that, I'm not saying he's right. That's not my view. I'm just saying that in the video, his interpretation was that crucifixion meant death by crucifixion. So his idea was that yes, he was on the cross, but he was preserved from death, therefore he wasn't crucified. And that was just the conclusion he came to. But I'm not saying he's right.
No. I'm not saying you made any claims. I'm just, because I'm just trying to clarify it to you. I'm not saying you think that way, or we think that way. No, because even the act of crucifixion itself, from the times of the Romans to even the times of the Egyptians, it was the main purpose of even being hung up on the cross, even from the very beginning, is to send a message, is to humiliate you. So as Muslims, we don't believe that God, nor we believe that God saved the Messiah, Isa, peace be upon him, Jesus, peace be upon him. But he not only did he save him from death, he saved him from the humiliation too. Because the whole act of being crucified is, well, one, historically, you're naked. That's one. And two, you're even the act of being quote unquote nailed up, which is painful, even that within itself. So we believe that God saved our beloved Messiah, peace be upon him, from the act of humiliation and the death as well. So we don't believe, no. Yeah, so sorry, but go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Adam, you want to add something in there?
No. That's all I wanted to say. That was just what the guy said. That's all.
Right. So yeah, the point is that the Quran just says that he was saved, right? Now, how he was saved, this is sort of like kept a mystery by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because if he really wanted to clarify how he saved, the mechanism exactly, whether it be the substitution theory, whether he was raised up before he died, or whatever the case. But like the brother said, it just clearly says that he was not put on the cross, he was not crucified, right? And he was saved from all of that humiliation, right? because in Islam, Jesus, peace be upon him, he's not just considered a Navi, but he's a Rasul. He brought Risala, he brought revelation. So he has a special status, right? And generally speaking, I cannot recall a single Rasul that was killed in Islam, right? Because it's, as I said, like the status of prophets, it is high among humans, but then even among prophet, because prophet is just a general term, right? Then there are two different categories, right? There's the Nabi, right? Or in Hebrew they call it Navi, right? That actually goes by a previously established Sharia or the code of law that was laid down by a previous Rasul, right? And then we have the Rasul, right? Now, Isa alayhi salam, Jesus peace upon him, he was a Rasul, right? So it would be a great humiliation for him to die in that manner, especially if he was killed by the very people that he was sent to, and he was not able to propagate that particular religion or that revelation that he was sent for, right? Now, the extra biblical sources, what we could do is the reason why I may have to appeal to even the early church, be it heretical groups and whatnot, right? Because that would also technically be considered extra biblical because it's not part of your canon, correct? So we can start with that, and then we can work our way up to, be it Tacitus, Josephus, all the secular Roman historians and whatnot that get brought up quite often during these conversations. All right. So I mean, early on, I don't know how much. Have you ever done any research? Because I don't want to waste any time if you already know of many groups that were considered heretical, obviously later on by the church, right? That did not believe that Jesus peace upon him was crucified. Be it the the Docetists or Basilidians, etc., Valentinians. Have you done any research on that?
So in terms of like looking at the extra biblical stuff in regards to the crucifixion, you see the term, like I know you said, Gnostic is generally used as a blanket statement. I mean, it still continues to some degree to be used as a blanket statement within academia when it comes to defining certain historical events like the crucifixion. So so when they say, like, in academia, if you look at what's called the Gnostic position on crucifixion, it's generally the view that in line with this idea of spirituality and physicality, that anything physical is bad, anything spiritual is good. Therefore, you had a number of groups who came to the conclusion, based on this idea of gnosis, which was this direct revelation from God, that Christ could not be crucified because he didn't have a physical body. But they had a very elevated, deified view of who Jesus was, even to begin with. But like, you see, the thing is, when I'm looking at this, like, historically speaking, and I look at, like, the different conclusions that different scholars have come to this, like, Ehrman, like like E.P. Sanders, even the most critical of scholars, they come to the conclusion that he was dead and buried. They don't shy away from that fact, and that's based on their the methodology that they use when looking at history and evaluating all the sources that are available. So when I look at this academically and scientifically, one fact still remains, is that the majority of information that is there points towards a literal death, a literal crucifixion, right? There is information that is contrary to that, but I would say that information is quite small. It's quite scant. And you see, if I'm looking at it from a majority position, I tend to, if I'm coming to a conclusion, I go with what the majority of evidence says about something. That's not to say that the majority of evidence is always right. I mean, the majority could be wrong. I mean, that's also possible. But I'm just saying that that's kind of how I look at it when I'm conducting, my kind of, or coming to whatever conclusion I want to come to in any one event. And there's other stuff as well, like, maybe we can look at some other stuff as well in the Quran in regards to certain claims that I find, historically speaking as well, don't really make sense to me when I look at the history and I compare it against the history. But that doesn't mean that the Quran is wrong. Even if the majority, as I said, the majority could be wrong. The majority might indicate this and it might not be right about this. I don't know.
Agreed. But again, quite a bit to unpack in there. So first, let's talk about the extra biblical sources, and we can talk about like what the likes of Bart Ehrman and whatever other scholars or historians might actually argue regarding that. Right now, first, let's talk about the early, um, you know, quote unquote heretical groups that actually did not believe in the crucifixion of Jesus, right, or that he was crucified. You have the Basilidians, right, from the early second century. Um, Now they believed that Simon of Cyrene was crucified, right, instead of Jesus. Then you have the Docetists, right, from the first century, because the movement started from the first century and it overlapped onto the second century, right, according to various scholars. Now they believed that the crucifixion obviously was an illusion, right, which you would refer to as probably somehow Gnostics or whatever, right? Now they you can see this clearly in the Gospel of Peter, right? Now Valentinians, right, from the second century, they also believe that Jesus did not truly suffer or die on the cross because he was, not purely a material being. Right now, according to various scholars, Justin Martyr would have been one of the Docetists as well, right? Because of his writings or the way he describes Jesus, right? Now, then you have the Ebionites or the Nazarenes, which is, we might, if we get enough chance to discuss them as well, later on from the first century. They denied the divinity of Jesus and believed in him to be a prophet only. They believed that he became the Son of Man. They believed in the adoptionist theory, right? And I can quote several verses from
I
their
just want to
gospels
point
for
out.
you.
I just want
Yes.
to quickly
Yeah.
point out that when, like, in terms of the Ebionites, because I was looking at what Bart Ehrman wrote on this, and he has a section on this on his blog. Um, yeah, okay, they may have denied the divinity of Christ initially, but they believe that he attained divinity through his fulfillment of his mission, which comes in the form of this adoptionistic position. So when you say it was a denial, it wasn't a complete denial of divinity outright, because if you hold to a view of adoptionism, that he was, that he became the Son of God through the fulfillment of the mission, and then he was given this divine eschatological role, and he becomes deified in some sense. That again, that's not talking about a mere prophet. I mean, that's an alternative view. That might It's like saying you started out like this, but then you end up deified because of the things you did before that. I mean, that's kind of a different thing.
So I would have to disagree with you over there, because, okay, and I have a PDF book of it. If you want, I can send you a copy of it later on over email. I think I sent it to you as well, Ali, if I'm not mistaken, a while back, right? By
Yep.
Jeremiah Coogan, right?
Hmm.
Now, I think he did a much better job covering what Ebionites actually believed, quite comprehensively, right? Okay, just one second. Yeah, sorry, Wissam just messaged me. Anyways, so because he's having some trouble with his father's shop, so he might not be able to join. But he was okay. So he's gonna try. Anyways, so now, according to scholars in general, and I think Jeremiah Coogan, if I'm not mistaken, he also mentions this in his book, right? That Ebionites, we don't know concretely what they believed, right? There could have been different sects within the Ebionites as well, right? Some of them, they could have believed in the divinity of Christ. Some of them may not, right?
Yeah.
The adoptionist theory actually, and that's where you have the textual variants come in too, right? This is one of the reasons why they were so reluctant to take out that particular variant from the Gospel of Mark, for instance, where Jesus was referred to as where the verse supposedly says, because in your Bible, most latest translation, it says, it refers to Jesus as um, uh, what is the exact verse, Ali? That at the baptism. Um, That
Oh,
you're my son today.
oh
I'm
yeah,
well pleased with you or
yes.
something,
So
right?
yeah, you're my son. On today I have
Okay.
begotten you.
No. So the today I've begotten you is not found in most translations these days, right?
Hmm.
Because that will
Right.
be the adoptionist theory, right? So in most translations it says that
That's
today I'm
not
well
with
pleased,
whom I'm all with whom I'm all pleased. Oh, okay, okay. I don't. Let me check up the verse. I know what you're talking. Let me check out the verse.
right? It's in Mark, I think, in chapter 1, right? But Adam, you know what I'm talking about, right? So
Mhm.
now this is one of the reasons why they actually took that portion out, because the moment you actually have the adoptionist theory, you question the divinity of Christ, because that means that he was not the begotten son from eternity past, right? um, but again, even there are different theories, right? Because that would be more like a metaphorical son, like how David is referred to in Psalm 2 as where God
So
refers to him as the begotten son of God. Yes, Ahi.
it's Mark chapter 1 verse 11, and it's also Matthew chapter 3 verse 17.
No, the Mark one, because Matthew would be
It's Mark.
considered a
Yeah,
redaction, right?
it's
Yeah.
no. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Both. It's Mark chapter 1 verse 11 and Matthew chapter 3 verse 17. But it's Mark 1:11.
Right. So what does it say exactly?
It says, "And the voice, and the voice came from heaven. You are my son, whom I love. With you I am well pleased."
Exactly. Now, if you actually put in there to have begotten you, that would put a question mark on the divinity of Christ, and that would liken him more to David in Psalm 2, right? And this is sort of what Ebionites as a whole, or at least the a sect within the Ebionites or the Nazarenes, they actually believed in, right? And as I said, like when you read more scholarship on it, they discuss this, right? I think Jeremiah Coogan in his book he discusses this as well, right? But the point is that the Ebionites, from what we know, they did not believe, because a lot of Christians they're under the idea, because I think it's Epiphanes, if I'm not mistaken, or one of the church fathers refers to them having Gospel of Matthew's, right? But then there are so many problems with that claim. Again, that's a big can of worms on its own, right? We'll get to that as well. But I did not want to derail from this particular topic for right now. So besides then
And
Ebionites and
uh,
Nazarenes, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say it fits this idea of how there would have been many groups of Ebionites with many different beliefs, because this idea of exaltation divinity, it's exaltation and exaltation divinity is a believer, or it's a notion where a human person can attain a divine status based on the good works, the magnificent works that they've done. And that's something that's been very, very common within the Greco-Roman world. Well, uh, in especially in paganistic beliefs. And the example is the Roman founder Romulus. According to their understanding, is that Romulus lived, being the founder of Rome, being a general, lived such a great life. At his end, he became a divine god. At his end, because he lived such a good life. And at that time, that's actually what some splinter groups of Jews actually, some of them believe the same thing to be with Moses. They believe Moses, being a wonderful prophet. A splinter group of them actually believed Moses, after he passed away, he actually attained divine status of some type. So this idea of exaltation divinity is more of a Hellenistic philosophy coming into it. This Greco-Roman philosophy seeping into it.
Yep. Jazakallah, right? So then we've got Cerinthians, right, from the first century. They follow the teachings of Cerinthus, right? And just as Ebionites, they also denied the divinity of Jesus, and they believed that the divine Christ descended upon human Jesus at his baptism, but left him before crucifixion, right? So you would sort of consider them pseudo Gnostic, but not exactly, right? Um, Now, the different documents that we have from the first or second century, right? Be it the Gospel of Hebrews, be it the Gospel of Thomas, right? The Gospel of Ebionites, as I mentioned, Gospel of Nazarenes, Gospel of Basilides, right? Gospel of Peter's, the Third Corinthians. It literally, it's also dated to by some scholars to the end of the first century, right? It starts off with addressing the people of Corinth and how there were so many people among them that did not believe that Jesus was crucified. It literally, like if you actually go online and you search for Third Corinthians, that's how it starts off, right? Then you have the Didache that absolutely has no mention of the crucifixion of Jesus at all, right? The second treatise of the Great Seth, right? They they believed, whomever actually wrote this gospel, or whomever believed in it, they believed that Jesus was obviously swapped by Simon of Cyrene as well, and then he stood off. I can actually quote you from there. I've got a quotation from there if you want, that I can quote you later on. That he stood off in distance and he laughed as they thought that he was being crucified, right? The Clementine homilies, right? They're very of Ebionite nature as well. They focused on theology, the theological and ethical content, and there is no crucifixion narrative or passion narrative found there at all, right? Basically, anything that is said to be penned by the be it Valentinus or he also, by the way, had Gospel of Truth, or anything that had uh, that is said to be penned by the Jacobites, right? The followers of Yaqub, the brother of Jesus, James, right? It does not have any passion narrative in there at all, right? So all of those were not considered to be part of the canon for that specific reason, because missing the passion narrative, right? But who is to then decide that these are to be canonized? It is obvious that now, looking back, right, we look at Jesus in light of Bible and we say, okay, there it says he was crucified, and even within the two gospels of um, the New Testament, you see Jesus, he hands over the cross. So who carries the cross for Jesus? Simon of Cyrene. I think it's in Gospel of Matthew and Luke, if I'm not mistaken, or is it Mark? Ali.
It's, I believe it's what?
Which Gospels does he disappear completely? I forget, like because it's within
Oh,
two
it's Mark.
Gospels, right?
I believe it's in Mark and Matthew, but let me double check.
Right. So within two gospels, as you may have noticed, Adam, that he disappears when carrying the cross. But in Gospel of John, he's the one carrying the cross all the way. There is no mention of Simon of Cyrene carrying the cross, right? But the two gospels that I'm talking about, that the brother will confirm, right? uh, Simon of Cyrene carries the cross, right? And then the only time you actually, and then there is no mention of Jesus at all. The only time Jesus is actually mentioned is when he is already on the cross, right? So it is presupposed that that is actually Jesus, right? And then there are redactions in there, right? So as I said, it's not very clear. It's a bit obscure, right? So you have to make a lot of presuppositions to actually say, okay, this is the same person that was there initially, then somebody else carried the cross for him, and then the cross was handed over to him right before crucifixion, because that also, by the way, does not make any sense at all, right? Because this was a way of Romans humiliating the person, the criminals carrying the cross, because they had to carry the cross, um, you know,
all the way to where they would have been crucified, right? It makes absolutely no sense that
Okay,
they are actually having somebody else help him. Yes, Sahi.
you know, the funny thing is we were right, but it's actually all three of them. It's Mark, Simon of Cyrene carried the cross in Mark chapter 15 verse 21, Matthew chapter 27 verse 32, and Luke chapter 14 verse 27. All three of them
No,
say Simon of Cyrene carried the cross. But as far as the one
but
that did
yeah.
not even mention Jesus, it was
Mhm.
Mark.
Okay, so there you go. It's probably one or two of them. Like I thought there were two of them, but anyways, the point still stands, right? Because if it is Mark and Mark being the, excuse me, the earliest gospel, right, doesn't mention Jesus there, right? And as I said, Gospel of John, the latest gospel, that is where you have, you know, the highest exaltation of Jesus, and he says things on the cross that you're not going to find in any other gospels, etc. Right? But since you mentioned E.P. Sanders, even according to him, the Gospel of John is the least reliable, right? Be it C.S. Lewis, be it Bart Ehrman, be it most scholars actually, they share the opinion that Gospel of John is the least reliable in terms of history. It could have those nuggets in there, right? But you know, when they're trying to reconstruct the historical Jesus in light of Bible, nobody, no critical scholar will ever start with the Gospel of John, and it is for that reason, right? Because the Christology that is portrayed in the Gospel of John, it's so different than the Synoptic Gospels, right? And it is, as I said, the latest gospel, right? Now, I'm going to have you come back and because my apologies if I spoke for too long, but the point that I was trying to make is that there were plenty of writings early on, plenty of groups that actually did not believe, and I've got so many church fathers that actually mention in their um, writings about different groups that actually did not believe that Jesus was crucified, and these are from the first and second century. But go ahead, Adam, if you want to come back and add something in there.
Yeah, no, I just want to reiterate my previous point, which is that, like, as I said, the historians and the scholars, when they look at the historicity of Jesus, based on all the information they have in front of them, that they're not, like, neglecting some bits of information, some documentary evidence, and then just holding to certain bits of it. They're looking at all of it, and they all come to the conclusion he was dead and buried. And that's the same conclusion I come to when I look at the evidence, because the majority does suggest that. I mean, even the minority, like the minority of evidence that does exist, as I said, it's not that plentiful compared to the majority position. And then on top of that, the majority of the people in that minority position held to the view that he was divine in some sense. But I don't understand how that supports a Muslim Jesus. I mean, one of the things I'm trying to determine and look for evidence for is, well, if you say these Muslims were there, I mean, there should be concrete names. I can't. There is no, like, if you look at all the documentary evidence that we have from the first, second, third, fourth, fifth century up until the time of Muhammad, there doesn't seem to be any names given of who these Muslims were. Because if they held to this view, right? And look, you can make the persecution point, but I mean, the early church up until the time of Constantine, every Christian was being persecuted. They didn't have time to persecute each other; they were being persecuted themselves. There's a book by Patrick Whitsworth that's called "Defining God," and he goes into the whole historical situation with the early church up until Constantine and the severe persecution that the earliest Christians came under by the different emperors up until that point. But my point is that, again, as I said, when I look at this scientifically and I look at this academically, I see a whole weight of information that points and leans towards the crucifixion actually having happened, right? And it's from that then I have to derive my conclusion. As I said before, the majority may be wrong. Maybe all that evidence is wrong, and the minority was what was suppressed, and that is, in fact, the truth. I don't know. I'm just saying that when I look at these things rationally, I have to look at what the majority are saying, because from a historical standpoint, that's what I give most credence to. What are the majority of people saying? And if they're saying this one thing unanimously, then that's what I go with. But again, like that would be my kind of question to you is, yeah, and I think I asked Yemeni this as well. And I hope we can discuss this a bit more next week when I'm talking with them. Well, maybe not next week. Maybe when we finish with Matthew or something, because that's going to take a while. But I would like concrete names of who these Muslims are, because I can't seem to find them anywhere. Because if there were Muslims in the within the definition of the word who worshipped the God of the Quran, well, where's the evidence for them? First, second, third, fourth, fifth century.
So,
Okay,
so
so
for what,
go ahead, brother. Yeah,
so,
go ahead.
yeah, I wanted to address the first thing that, because we want to take this bit by bit. So just to address the first thing that you said, Adam, about the historical
So
evidence going. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So even just to address what you said about the historical evidence going against the Quran, we need to understand what history is. Brother Faisal, I'm hearing feedback. I don't know if that's from you or Fawad or somebody. Okay.
I'm on mute.
Yeah,
I was
that's
on
what you
mute.
said.
No, I muted
Oh,
you for
sorry
that
about
reason. Yeah, I was about to write
Okay.
for you in private chat. Yeah.
that. So we need to understand what history is, Adam. History, the definition of history is basically the study of past events. So it's something that can never be for certain. And that's one thing, personally, that's actually the one thing why I love history so much, is because there is no such thing as certainty within history. And historians themselves will tell you this. They'll tell you this. They'll say, hey, based on the evidence that we see, or it's most likely, or it's most probable, or it's most possible, they would not use a certainty claim. Now, the only times they'll say, well, the only times they will say something that resembles that is if all the evidence that they see, but they themselves understand that the absence of evidence is not the evidence. The absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. So because historians understand that, that's why they most commonly associate themselves with based on the evidence that we have. Now, I would actually disagree with you, Adam. I would say the actual history itself does favor the Quran, and it favors the very verse that you mentioned in the beginning, chapter 4, verse 157. Because what happened at the end of the same verse, after God's, and I'll just read the whole verse to you. And for boasting, talking about the Jews, and for boasting, we killed the Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, the messenger of Allah, but they neither killed nor crucified him. It was only made to appear so. Even those who argue for this crucifixion are in doubt. They have no knowledge whatsoever, only making assumptions. They certainly did not kill him. And at the end of the verse, God says, for one, he says, even those who argue for this crucifixion are in doubt, meaning even from the very beginning, it wasn't such a clear thing. That's why in the beginning, we were talking to you about how certain groups in the first century, second century, third century, fourth century, even they disputed this idea that Jesus, peace be upon him, was crucified. And then, of course, over time, where the canonization of Christianity came through, the evidences were gone, and a lot of inappropriate, unfortunate things happened to eliminate the evidence. Now, that would leave doubt as to, wait, if they're altering beliefs in the very beginning, now I thought it's something that happened, especially since there's a lack of witnesses on the outside looking in. And then the last part, which I want you to give very very pay close attention to. They have no knowledge whatsoever, only making assumptions. Most of the people that talk about it, even in the actual gospels itself, we can get to that, there weren't eyewitnesses there. And the people that are talking about it from then on to this day, they weren't eyewitnesses themselves. Going along with history is a huge assumption. That's what history that's what history is. If I'm talking about something that happened 1,000 years ago, I'm using the record, I'm using history, I'm using the records that I had that someone may have manipulated, and I'm using it to make an assumption. Something that is not 100%, by definition, is an assumption. I'm assuming it because I can't be certain. And then as soon as God says they're only making assumptions, which is relying on history, he also says they certainly did not kill him. And it goes hand in hand with what you're talking about. Most of history can be wrong, and that's the beauty of it. History can be wrong. That's why using history itself as a framework for truth, as a primary structure of truth, is very, very problematic. That's like building the base of a building out of clay. Oh, sorry, out of something weak. No matter how much you build, how high you build the building, with a weak foundation, it's going to fall. And history used primarily as a source for primary structure is never a wise option. And now ultimately, this verse, God is saying it didn't happen, but the people thought it happened, meaning it was only made to appear so. If people believed it happened, what are they going to write? What are they going to record? What are they going to say if God is saying, oh, yeah, these people thought it happened? That was the perception, but it just didn't happen. So God is saying, even though the people believed it happened, it didn't happen. But since the people believed it happened, that's what history is going to focus on. History is going to focus on the people that believed it happened, that could have been wrong, and we believe they were wrong. And then, of course, those records are going to last throughout time because that's the only records historians will see. So if so this what you said, actually I do disagree. It actually goes along with what the Quran is saying to a T, because every single point that God made is actually true to this day. Someone believed it happened. They wrote down history, study of past events based on records and evidence. They see the evidence that they have that survived, and they made an assumption, because even with the evidence, they can't be certain with it. And then it leads them to make a conclusion based on that assumption. That's history. And that's what God is talking about.
Yeah,
I
Adam,
was just,
would you like to add? Yeah.
my response to that would be like, okay, if you
Mhm.
say it favors the Quranic position, let's just say,
Mhm.
well, if it favors the Quranic position, then why don't historians and scholars come to the conclusion that's in the Quran? Because they don't come to that conclusion. Now, I know you said that it has to do in some sense with, how we interpret history, right? That, we cannot
Mhm.
have in some sense absolute certainty in regards to, events, particularly the further you go back, the harder it is to have an exact understanding of what happened in that moment, right? And
Mhm.
that is true to some extent. But their basis for that is based off every bit of evidence that they have, and for them it leans, like, I'll give you an example. Ehrman said he's absolutely certain that Christ was crucified. He doesn't shy
Okay.
away from that fact. And others say the same thing from a scholarship standpoint, that for them that's
Exactly.
one of the things they're certain about. Now,
Well, they
I'm
don't
not
say
saying
that.
they're right. I'm not saying that they're right. And
No,
I'm
no.
not
I'm
saying,
saying. So go. Sorry, I'm interrupting you. My apologies. Go ahead.
sorry, I was just saying that I'm not saying that they're right, and I'm not saying that the majority position is always right from a historical standpoint. Because if you talk about, for example, a historical cover-up, right, you could have a situation where people have an agenda, right, and they end up preserving the position of that time that they want preserved over what actually happened for some reason or another. That's possible. I'm not saying that that's impossible. That may well have
Mhm.
happened. But what I'm saying is that the reason people come to the conclusions that they say, well, we're fairly confident that this happened in this way, is because they're just looking at the evidence. Again, the evidence might be wrong. That's absolutely possible. But my
Exactly.
question then that I would lead on from that would be, because this is something I find a bit strange, right? So it says it was
Mhm.
made to appear unto them, right? Now I'm
Mhm.
assuming that was something done by God, right? In the context of what that
No.
verse is. You can correct me if I'm wrong, because I have a
So.
question in regards to that.
One second, Ali. I'm just gonna add one thing in there, and then you guys can continue the conversation, right?
Go
Because
ahead.
so, Adam, like, even if I were to grant you, right, that Jesus was crucified, right, but that's not where Christian doctrine ends. That's not what it's all about. It has to include the resurrection narrative too, right? Which you would have to prove without special pleading if you want to go by secular sources or what historians are claiming, like Bart Ehrman or whatever. Because Bart Ehrman is not of the opinion that he was resurrected. You know this, right? And every single secular historian says the exact same thing. They do not believe, right, that Jesus was resurrected. I mean, you can't have it both ways, Adam, right? Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidences, right? if you actually claim that he was resurrected, then you would have to prove that without special pleading that he did in fact resurrect. Because I mean, there were plenty of people throughout history that were crucified or died by other means. Do I need a scholar or historian to tell me that somebody 2,000 years ago died? No, I don't. Right? Whatever means they may have died, by natural causes or being stoned to death or by crucifixion. Because remember, the Talmud also actually records the death of Jesus, but they record him being stoned to death. Right? And then his body, the reason why it was stolen from the tomb was because God, it claims in Talmud that dogs ate his body. Right? That's why it disappeared. Now, as I said, you would have to, we can talk about Bart Ehrman, and I will tell you why his position is actually very problematic, right? And I'm not going to special plea, I'm not going to go to Islam. I'm just critiquing Bart Ehrman's position or any historian that claims, because Bart Ehrman has been critiqued by so many historians, so many scholars, right, for his position. Because on one hand, he actually claims that the Gospels are not reliable, right? Brother Faisal, we can hear you. uh, I don't know if it's actually if it's too close to here, but we can hear you breathing.
Okay,
Yeah, bro.
Yeah.
That
I'll move this
microphone
up.
is amazing.
So
The microphone
Sometimes
is amazing.
it's
You have, yo.
sometimes it's really
yeah.
good, sometimes it's really bad.
Yeah, no worries, inshallah. Right? So on one hand, the guy says that these books are not reliable. We don't know who the authors are. Then he claims that those same books claim that he was crucified, hence he was crucified. Because we can talk about the secular sources, right? None of them actually are preserved, and we will get to those, right? Those are all dubious sources, be it Tacitus, be it Josephus, be it Pliny the Younger, whatever. We can talk about those, right? But sticking to Bart Ehrman's position or any historian that actually makes this claim, it is very problematic, right? Because as I said, Christianity is not just about somebody dying. 2,000 years ago, a Palestinian man died. What is so extraordinary about that? If he had not died by crucifixion or being stoned, he would have died naturally, right? Do I need a historian to tell me that? No, I don't, right? But look at what the Quran is saying. The Quran is not going against the history. What Quran is claiming is that people believe that he died. Did people believe that he died? Yes. So the Quran is not going against history at all, contrary to what most Christians believe, right? However, the Quran does add that caveat in there that he was saved. Now, about which means? Now, that's actually a supernatural claim. Now, that a historian will never, in 1 million years, will they'll be laughed at in the academia. Can you imagine a historian actually, or Bart Ehrman or whomever, even if it's somebody religious? Would they be taken seriously in any university in the world if they actually include that in their dissertation or their thesis? No, they'll be laughed at, right? So we have to sort of dissect each claim and separate both of them. The theological claim, you can't expect a historian to give you that. When historians, they give you their claim, they give you based on what? Let's look at the evidence that they're providing, how consistent they are with their position. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So my question then is anyway. I'll just quickly just jump in on Bart Ehrman for a second, and very on the extreme critical end. I mean, the methodology that they apply centers around a thing called the criterion of dissimilarity and the criterion of embarrassment, right? Which are two criterions they use to come to what they believe to be the most accurate historical Jesus they can find. And it's through those criterions that he comes to the conclusion that Jesus was crucified. Because he tries to sift out effectively from the Bible the most naturalistic historical representation of Jesus he can get. Now, he's not the only one that's done that. Others have done that as well. Now, Bart Ehrman does believe that the earliest followers of Jesus perceived that they had seen him resurrected. He doesn't believe that he was actually resurrected, that there was a literal resurrection. But he believes that because there's a testimony of it, that the earliest followers believed in some sense they had seen him resurrected. Now, that could have been some form of weird group psychosis, according to him, okay, that people were just going with because they couldn't accept the fact that their so-called Messiah had actually died, right? But my question then is, so if it's made to appear onto them that this thing happens, and it happens like that, but what are the ramifications of that, right? Because if you talk about worship and those who are worshiping Allah, who was worshiping Allah then as a consequence of this event after the time of Jesus up until the time of Muhammad? Because I would even
Before
my apologies, Adam.
before we jump
Yeah,
to
yeah.
this point,
Guys,
Fawad, I just want to make sure we're addressing something. So I know we're sort of talking a lot about what type of evidence should we be accepting and the different conclusions that are there. We've not analyzed the evidence, right? Here's the question. What is the evidence that you have which is overwhelming for you that you're coming to the conclusion that Jesus was crucified? Can you just give us that, or basically let's just walk through that evidence and we'll tell you why it's questionable, and the conclusion that you're coming to is actually even more questionable, right? And I'll actually, once you've gone through that evidence, I'll actually give you an analogy that would help you understand why the conclusions that you're coming to are not necessarily the most meaningful conclusion that we should arrive at. If we're taking a very naturalistic viewpoint, right? Remember, when it comes to academia presupposes metaphysical naturalism. There's no supernatural. There's no God. There's nothing, right? What's the conclusion that we would arrive at if we just exclude all metaphysical elements from it, right? So let's just assume that. Let's go through the evidence and let's see what's the conclusion that we can come to.
So basically, Adam, like what we're trying to do, like the brother said, right? Because we're mixing up too many things, right? So we have to unpack each thing separately, right? So we will talk about who were the followers of Jesus. What did they believe? What did Jesus himself believe? What did the prophets believe, right? That's a separate topic. That has nothing to do with crucifixion, right? So let's unpack the crucifixion narrative, right? Then we will come to who were the followers of Jesus, what do they believe, and so on and so forth, right? So like the brother asked, can you please answer that question, please?
Yeah, no, we can go through. I mean, like we can go through all the different sources, the documentary sources from the 1st and 2nd century if you want. We can go through that. I mean, but that's going to take some time. I mean, the question, I wanted to finish my point first, which was in regards to Surah Al-Nisa, verse 157. My question was, this event seems to have caused deception in some sense among the people that saw it, right? That it led people astray from who Jesus was. And as a result of it, it seems that it caused a form of exaltation for him that people then ran with as a consequence of what they saw. And then this lasted for 500-600 years after his crucifixion. I want to know what the purpose behind that was, because this single event in and of itself seems to have led to some form of apostasy. So, who instigated this event, and why did they instigate it in that way if it was going to lead to this kind of mass apostasy? Because you then have a verse in the Quran that says something to the effect of where Allah is talking with Jesus, and he says to Jesus, did I ask you to take yourself and your mom as deities besides me? And he says, no, I only ever said I was a messenger. So, if this was unanimously clear that he was clear in his preaching, how does something like this happen? Who was the agent behind this, and then why does it lead to 500-600 years of apostasy? Because again, if there are so-called Muslims over this 500-year period, then where's the concrete names for these people and the evidence for it? Because that was my question previously. That's kind of what I'm interested in.
We'll get to that, Adam. We're not shying away from that. But the problem is when we mix up so many things, we're not going to get anywhere, right? And we can be here all night, but we're not going to get anywhere.
I've written down your questions, all right, and we'll come back to these, right? So you've asked about who caused the dissension among the people, right? Who's the agent, essentially, who's the agent behind all of this, right? And then the other part of it you want to know is who are the Muslims according to the quranic narrative, who are the Muslims, who were the Muslims from at the time of Jesus and then later on, right? And we can have that conversation, all right? But really, where we're sort of disagreeing is this idea that you believe that the evidence leads to conclusion A, and we say this evidence does not lead to conclusion A, right? And we're basically disagreeing on that. So we would just want to go through the evidence. We don't need to go through everything. We can summarize the evidence of what it was, right? And if we need to dive into any one of them where we disagree, we can basically do that. Let's start from a sort of a summary point of view, a summary of the evidence, right? So the first thing, we all know that there was an intent to kill Jesus, peace be upon him, right? From the Jews, and there was an intent to use the political system that was there at that time. Basically the Romans did not accept any rebellion against their rule, so that was sort of the mechanism that was being utilized by the Jews to get rid of Jesus, right? At least we can agree to that part, right? How that plays out and all of the details after that we can talk about, right? The next thing we know is that there was at least some sort of a trial according to the narratives that we have, right? Where Jesus was being judged and another individual was being judged. Okay. Interestingly enough, both of them had the same name, Jesus and Jesus Barabbas, right? Jesus, son of the Father.
Faisal Akhi, my apologies, forgive me. See, this is what I did not want to do, because now we're stuck in a loop, right? And we don't have enough time, because he said that he only has 2 hours, right, with us.
Okay.
I don't want you to appeal. I don't want him or you or us to appeal to the Bible, because that will be special pleading. That will be begging the question, right? Because it's our word versus his word.
No,
I
but
don't
for
think
what?
we're going to go anywhere.
That's the evidence
one
that he's putting forward, right?
No, but that's what I mean. And I will also clarify as to why we should not appeal to the Bible, because the biblical narrative is written decades later, not by eyewitnesses. No scholar actually says that it's written by eyewitnesses. Hence, it is an event that took place, and about 5 to 6 to 7 decades later, it is being written about. So we should put the biblical evidence aside, because not eyewitness. So I don't care even if 1,000 historians say based on this particular evidence, because the evidence itself has to be examined. It is not substantiable, right? It's not concrete for me to even consider it, right? Because it's like you walking up to a historian and saying, or let's say saying, that according to historians, no historians agree that Moses split the sea. We know.
But Fawad, here's the thing. Even if we consider the biblical evidence, the conclusion that you're coming to, Adam, or the conclusion that Bart Ehrman actually comes to, is not necessarily the most valid conclusion if you're taking just naturalistic explanations for it, right? And that's why I was just going through this. I'm not going to take long, right? After this, let's say there's this whole event where Jesus is arrested according to the Bible, right? And then the procession happens and Jesus is put on cross. Now, my question is, who are the eyewitnesses, the actual eyewitnesses who testify that I saw Jesus going through all of this and being put up on the cross and dying on the cross? Who are those people that you can confirm to by name?
Who was there at the time of the crucifixion?
Yeah.
I mean, there would have been a number of witnesses to the crucifixion itself.
By name?
By name, I would say John was there.
Are you
I would
sure?
say some of the women were there. But then I would also say, I mean, here, okay, you see, you're going with later documents. I would ask you, what's the earliest document we have on the ministry of Jesus?
So for me,
the crucifixion.
For me, the question is about the crucifixion itself, and about this whole piece. who is giving us that narrative? Is it someone who had seen it? Or is it someone who's claiming that they've met someone who's claiming something about the crucifixion?
Yeah, they're all every bit of documentary evidence we have pretty much from the first century is either by first or second hand witnesses. But
is there first hand witnesses? Who's the first hand witness?
They're all testimonies. They're all testifying to things that they've seen or heard, right?
Who is it who's testifying? That's what we're trying to get to.
Well, I gave you some of the names, but I couldn't name every single person that was there by name. But my question then is, what's the earliest what's the earliest document we have according to scholars in regards to the crucifixion that mentions the crucifixion?
So for me, that doesn't matter, Adam. At the end of the day, if John was standing there or any of the disciple was standing there and they did not, we cannot confirm that a document written by them is surviving. We don't have that evidence. It's not first-hand anymore. Right?
Yeah. My point is, in terms of the earliest document that we have, right? What is it like? This is considered to be the earliest document by the earliest followers, meaning the earliest followers were going around testifying to this thing. My question is what is that document?
The first document that we have in Christianity are the letters of Paul, right? There's nothing before that.
Well, the earliest so-called source that mentions the crucifixion is referred to as the Carmen Christi, which is dated to the 30s, which is dated to the late 30s AD. Even Bart Ehrman says so in his scholarship.
And where are they?
So what does the Carmen Christi say about Jesus?
Where are they, Adam? Where are the manuscripts? Where are these?
It doesn't matter. There's a thing called oral tradition. These things, like you have a thing with hypothesis, the Q hypothesis, how these things come into existence.
Again, Q is just a hypothesis, okay? And you should know, I hope you know, that this is a latest hypothesis. That's not something that even you don't find any church fathers referring to the Q document or something. This is just this is latest scholarship that's been developed in the last 200 years or so, right? The point that we're trying to make, Adam, you see, and that's exactly what Ali said. All of this, what you're saying, it confirms Quran. It strengthens the Quranic position even more. And I'll tell you why. Because the Quran says that they believe in conjecture. What you're saying, A to Z, it's conjecture. Because what you're saying, this scholar is saying that, this scholar is saying that scholar is saying that, right? But what is their position based on? Their position is based on the documents that are available from these same people. By the way, we don't have access to all of the documents. Could there have been other groups that actually did not believe? Probably they may have even documented that he was actually not crucified, clear cut. Yes. Do we have access to those? No, we don't. What got survived, they have to actually base their opinion on that, right? Now, you can come back and say that's an argument from silence, but I gave you a list of documents from the 1st and 2nd century where, they did not believe what you believe. So then you would have to special plead and say, you know what? No, those are heretical, right? But their heresy is your orthodoxy. Your orthodoxy is their heresy, right? So again, you're stuck in it's a circular argument, right? If I were to ask you, can you prove to me, right, without appealing to circular reasoning, right, that Jesus actually died? You cannot use Bart Ehrman, because what is Bart Ehrman using? He's using the Bible, right? So as I said, his position is not very strong. It's laughable. In certain circles, it is laughable. I can quote to you. Do you want me to quote to you some scholars? As a matter of fact, I uploaded a video not long ago. It was last week, Ahwan, right? Like probably 5 days ago or something, right? Where a scholar, actually, they were discussing the position of Bart Ehrman in that video. It's like literally a 10 minutes video or something. And they said that he's not consistent, because everything that you give me about the crucifixion and the resurrection narrative, be it the empty tomb, and the witnesses, all of that, that can be found in the Greco-Roman world. Romulus, there you have literally, you, if you want, I can quote to you Tertullian, Justin Martyr. They actually appeal. They in their letters, they literally actually write to whatchamacallit, the the Roman senators, if I'm not mistaken, right? I actually opened it last week to one of the Christians, right? Where they literally actually say that what we believe about Jesus is nothing different than what you guys believe. And he names all those people. Why is he naming those particular people? Because people at that time in antiquities, they believed that something very similar like that happened to their quote unquote gods. That you will actually today, sitting in 2024, you would say, oh, those are mythologies. But again, you're special pleading. And this is the problem with Bart Ehrman. He special pleads there. Because why is he not giving the same benefit of the doubt? Why is he not having a consistent position about Romulus? Right? Because they have every single thing that you guys have for Jesus's crucifixion and his resurrection. They have it for the Greco-Roman deities. So what would you say to that?
About the like Romulus and the Roman deities. Yeah, but they don't have historical reality to their existence. I mean, you're talking about historical figure versus a
Not
figure
true.
that isn't historical.
Untrue.
That's not
Untrue.
that's not true.
The Caesars, all of the Caesars, right? They're recorded, right, in the Roman documentation. So what I suggest you do, I don't know if we're gonna have enough time. Richard C. Miller, he wrote a book called Resurrection and Reception in Early Christianity. I would suggest you buy that. He records in there about 70 odd cases of other ancient Roman quote unquote gods, because they were deified later. They were normal human beings, right? Out of which 50 or so of them, they had missing tombs, right? They were witnessed by people that actually witnessed and told other people, right? And not just one, but several people, right? In one case, I even mentioned that on one of the streams last week, that they were carrying a tomb that he mentions in his book. They were carrying a tomb of a person, and while they were carrying the tomb, when they got to the destination where they were about to bury him or whatever, right? When they opened the tomb, the body was gone, right? And people started referring to him as, guess what? Son of God, just as Jesus, right? So again, you're special pleading. You're saying theirs is mythology, right? But ours is not, right? Again, that's special pleading. And that's what I see you doing again and again, because the Caesars, they were historical figures, right?
No, I wasn't talking about the Caesars. I was referring to like the likes of Ra and Horus and those gods. I'm talking
No,
about
no.
Well, in terms of
Yeah.
in terms of those gods, and this is one thing actually Barterman actually says in a lecture that he was given. He was talking about the three different ways how people perceived God. And we actually talked about the first way, which is exaltation. So one way that in the ancient world how people had an understanding of God is through exaltation, divinity, which is somebody who's born, raised a human, living a great life, a life of great, accomplishments, and in his death he ascends to be God, and he gives examples of that, and examples include Hercules, includes Romulus. It even includes there's this one figure in Egyptian mythology. I can't really remember his name right now. Passed away, became a god. And another way is somebody coming, God coming down and impregnating or having, we would call them demigods. And again, an example of that would be Hercules. An example of that would be Achilles. An example of that will be even in Roman times, even Alexander the Great himself. Alexander the Great believed himself to be the son of Zeus. He legitimately believed himself to be the son of Zeus. And one of the ways that one of the evidences that his mother gave to him that literally gave him his belief is that his eyes, the people, I forgot what condition that's called, the pupils of his eyes, the left was different. The color of the left was different from the color of the right. The one of his pupils was brown. The other one was blue. Now, how did he believe he was the son of Zeus? Simple. Zeus in this time was said to have blue eyes. So since, oh, wait a minute, Alexander has one blue eye and one brown eye, so he thought himself to be half human, half god, because Zeus has blue eyes, and look at me, I'm so great. I might as well be Zeus, which is a common belief even even at the time in ancient Greece. People believed that. I give examples. And the third way is when God comes down and lives as man. That's the third way. Literally, you have a divine deity, fully God, comes down to live amongst the man. And you would see that in Egyptian mythology. Horus comes down and interacts with man. Vishnu comes down and interacts with man as avatars. You have Zeus. They come down and impregnate, live as man. That's their god, but they're still living amongst man. And why did those people do that? Simple, because us as humans, our psychology is we feel more connected to God if he acts like us or if we get closer to him. Literally, humans felt more connected to God if man can become God and God can come down as man. So they basically muddied the waters. And notice in those three ways, those three narratives, all three of them are viewed in as Jesus. Literally, Jesus fits all three. In according to the Gospels, he actually fits all three categories. So it's something that is used historically as well. And I use Romulus, I use Alexander the Great, amongst others. I can give you some more. Even Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar apparently, even according to his time, even after his time, when a Roman emperor would become emperor, what would he use? Caesar. And it's not even just back in the ancient world. Not too long ago, in this world that we're living in, so a czar, Adam, you've heard of a czar, right? Like Tsar Nicholas III and stuff like that.
No, no.
The Russians.
So yeah, the Russian dynasty, the title that they would go by is Tsar, Czar, Tsar, Tsar Nicholas, Tsar Alexander, etc., etc. Tsar is short for Caesar, and another one is the Kaiser of Germany.
Hmm.
Kaiser is a German way of saying Caesar. So that name itself has been used as a symbol of power, not just back in the times of ancient Rome, but even as recent as 100 years ago. So this idea itself of divination, of becoming God, of becoming doing great works, so you become God. It's something that has been used attached along with history for since the times of ancient Sumer, which is like 20,000 BC.
Yeah, but my like, what does this have to do with the crucifixion? I mean, how does
Oh,
this?
it has
So
everything to do with
okay,
crucifixion.
No, but in terms of the crucifixion narrative within the Quran, I mean, I'm just talking
Okay.
about the actual
so
crucifixion narrative that actually took
so
place.
so it has a lot to do with the crucifixion narrative with the Quran, simply because one, who are you talking to? And I'll give an example of that. God says in the Quran that when he says it was made to for people to see that, or it was made for them to see, it basically means because that's the translation. What the Quran is saying is that was their perception, not saying that God purposefully misled them. No, it's saying they perceived it that way. And as humans, I think you should know this understanding is your reality is your perception. Whatever you perceive about reality, that is your reality. So if you perceive reality to be X, to you reality is X. So the Quran is saying that's what they thought, that's what they believed, that's what that was their understanding, that was their perception of what goes on. And of course, the next sentence, God says these are people they don't know, meaning that they have doubts, because he's therefore God is saying their perception is flawed because they're full of doubts, meaning they don't even know, they have no certainty whatsoever. So God is
They're
literally
guessing.
saying they have they're guessing. It's all guesswork, meaning the perception itself, their understanding, the perception should not be trusted. So that's the narrative according to the Quran, what God is saying about their perception. Now, historically, and this goes back to who not only is who is telling the story, but more importantly, who is hearing the story. And why is that important? Because in life, it's not just about, when they say communication is key, not really. In life, comprehension is key, because how on earth am I going to communicate something to you if you're going to understand it in a different way than what I was meant to communicate to you? And a small example of that would be this notion of what it means to be the son of God. Simple. If let's say I was living in the time in the first century, and I'm talking to two different people, and I said the word the term son of God. Let's say person A is a Jew, person B is a Greek, and I told both of them son of God. They're going to interpret it differently. The Jews interpret this, and it's actually in the Bible, by the way. The Jews interpreted the Son of God as a pious human being. That was their understanding of what it means to be the Son of God, a pious human being, not God, just someone who lived a holy person, a good teacher, etc., etc. That's what the term Son of God is. However, to the Greeks, to the Romans, to the basically almost everybody around that time, because in Judea they were surrounded by Hellenism, geographically. And why were they surrounded by Hellenism? It's basically one guy. Well, you could say two guys' faults. The first guy is Alexander the Great, because Alexander the Great decided to say, "Hey, look at the known world. I want it for myself," and he literally conquered almost all of the known world at that time, which includes around Jerusalem as well, because he was a pharaoh of Egypt. He conquered Egypt. That's why Alexandria, Egypt. And if you ever see the name Alexandria, it's named after him, obviously. So he went to India, Persia, Egypt, etc., etc., and that's where Greek thought, Greek understanding started to flourish around the people at that time, from India to Persia to even Egypt, along with Jerusalem as well. That's where Hellenism started to flow. So the understanding of what it means to be the son of God started to go and take a Greek understanding. And then later on, you want to say Julius Caesar, the rise of the Roman Empire, basically, yeah, that's fine. So they had an understanding as well of what it means to be the son of God. And their understanding is, because they lived with demigods, they lived with their own perception. What did they think the son of God was? They thought the son of God to be literal. Hey, you are God on earth. Whether it's through exaltation, whether it's through God coming down, or whether it's to God, you know, literally you being half human, half God. You are a son of God. In whatever way it is, it's they took it to be literal. Now, why is this
Yep.
important? Simple. The Gospels were written in Greek. The whole New Testament was written in Greek to a Greek audience. How would they have comprehended it? They would have comprehended it literally.
So I'll tell you, Adam, like sort of to sum up, and I'll tell you why I mentioned that it has to do everything with crucifixion. Because what was a statement that you made earlier? You said that with the criteria of embarrassment and whatever presuppositions that historians and scholars they apply, and they come to that conclusion about even the existence of Jesus, right? They don't apply the same criteria as in case of Bart Ehrman, which is why so many scholars they actually don't agree with him, right? But since he's a renowned scholar, they're not going to make fun of him. But if it were an average Joe coming up with the same position, they would actually make fun of him, probably even write articles against him, right? But you can listen to so many scholars saying that he's not actually consistent with this position. And one of the reasons that they bring up is the one that I mentioned to you, the Caesars, Romulus, etc., right? And at the same time, like if you go to the Hindus, you think they don't believe that their quote unquote gods were historical figures? Of course they do. If they don't, they're not Hindus anymore. So for you to then point your finger at them and say, your deity is not real and mine is, special pleading, my friend,
Yep.
right?
And in addition to that, Fawad, the very conclusion that you're coming to, you won't come to that conclusion for any other individual. The fact that if you met someone who you heard passed away or was dead, and the next day you're meeting them, they're fine, they're okay, they tell you, touch me, and you touch them and you can feel their body, right? You're not going to believe that this guy came back from the dead. You're actually going to say, oh, he must have survived. I must have heard wrong. But in Jesus's case, you're actually coming to a conclusion that no, Jesus died, and then either one, everybody else is actually delusional now who knew him, but everyone else who didn't know him is actually giving you the right or the correct uh, uh, the correct events. So you're believing everyone else who does not know him, and the people who knew him, they're saying he was alive, and you're saying now that those people were wrong, the other people were right. Okay, or the fact that he never that event never happened, or it didn't happen the way it's actually presented. Everyone thought he died, but he survived, and the people who knew him met him, actually met him. So which of those events are most likely? If you take the most naturalistic explanation, it cannot be that he died and came back to life.
Exactly. And that's what we were trying to point out to you, Adam, that if you put your biases aside and you really think about this entire, because I'm not even appealing to the Quran. Right now, I'm trying to be as objective as I possibly can, honest to God, right? Because the way I'm looking at it, okay, if I were to examine this, right, what would I ask for? Would I say, are there any primary source materials? Nope. Right? In case of Bible, no primary source material. Okay, no scholar that you can bring me that will actually claim. And when I say a scholar, I mean a critical scholar, right? Because if you're just going to quote me just what Christian scholars say, might as well just go to a Sunday sermon, you know, with all due respect, right? But I mean critical scholar, right? No source critic will ever make that claim that we have primary source material. That's point number one. Point number two, are there any eyewitnesses, right? No, we don't. We don't have any eyewitnesses, right? You would have to presuppose that John was there, because even in Gospel of John, by the way, right, it does not identify that person to be John. You and I, we spoke about this previous week, that there is scholarship. They actually argued that this must have been probably James, because it's not very clear, right? Third, do we have a dead body that we can examine, right? That we can examine, we can test, that we can do any kind of post-mortem? No, we don't, right? Was his family interviewed? Do we have any documentations from his family, his mother or his brothers? We don't. So again, coming back, now I'm going to connect, no pun intended, connect the dots, right? What is the Quran saying? What they believe is just conjecture. And that's the exact definition of conjecture. My apologies, we've talked for too long, so please come back but please refute these exact same points that we brought up, right? Instead of going to other things, because we're gonna derail again, right?
Yeah. No, like, I mean, there's a number of critical scholars that view the Gospels themselves as reliable. I can give you a ton of names if you want, but I mean, we have our own list of scholars, right? And like, even within critical scholarship itself, it is divided, right? There are critical scholars that attest to the reliability of the scriptures, and then there are those who have a different view. But even those who have a different view still view those documents as the most accurate thing we have in regards to the life of Jesus and his ministry, like the likes of
Just
Barnard.
one second. So you said critical scholars. So I'm not trying to interrupt you, but can you name a source critic? Okay, a source critic, a renowned source critic that actually makes that claim.
Which claim?
That we have actually primary source material.
Yeah, there's a ton. Michael Kruger, there's a ton.
So
we can go Craig Keener, Craig Bloomberg, Friedrich Kenyon, Richard Bauchman, Peter J. Williams, Mark D. Roberts, Gary Habermas. There's a ton.
So all of these source critics, you're claiming that they are source critics, all of them, and they claim that the authorship is attributed to the people that Christians are claiming.
Yeah, they've written extensively on it. I mean, you can read their works if you want, but if people can come to their own conclusion on that, because there's, as I said, it's a divided field in and of itself. There's different sides, there's different takes on it.
See,
what I'm like in
so
terms of the
name your best scholar. Just name one or two, just real quick. The
well,
one
I
that
would
you want
say
me to look up.
the names that I mentioned, and also someone like D.A.
Give
Carson.
give me top two. Give me top two.
I couldn't give a top two because I view them all as valuable in terms of the research. I
No,
know
no,
kind of view them from the perspective of one is greater.
That's fine. But the one that comes to your mind first.
I would say Kruger and D.A. Carson.
Okay, D.A. Carson. Okay. Now, if we actually see, and this is the problem, guys. You see, and with all due respect to Adam, right? I want to share this, right? Right here. So if you guys can see on your screen, right? He's an evangelical theologian.
Mm-hmm. And he's emeritus professor of the New Testament.
Right.
He knows the Greek and he knows the context.
Right. Okay. So where does it say that he's a source critic? Can you please show me?
No, he, like in terms of his work. I mean, his work is highly regarded within academia. I'm studying theology at the moment. He's regarded as.
I understand. I understand that. But you see, for every theologian that you bring me, I can raise you 5 times. Then you would have to. Then. One second, Adam. Right. So let me please complete my. What I'm saying. Then you can come back. Right. So the point that I'm trying to make is that he's not a source critic. If you remember, I specifically actually asked you in the email that please, when you talk about scholarship, right, please bring me source critic. Because if you're not going to, yes, there are theologians, there are scholars, there are idiots online. They have written their blogs about what they think about Jesus. I mean, look, so if I were to quote Robert Price to you, that actually does not believe that the historical Jesus existed. He is a PhD scholar. Would you take him seriously?
No.
Why not? He's a scholar.
No, because of the evidence. I mean, I understand where that theory is coming from.
Evidence. You think a scholar is not going to give his evidence? You think he's just going to, write his thesis, dissertations, etc., without giving any evidence?
He builds a convincing case in regards to what he's saying, but I just don't buy it.
That's exactly. Says again, you're special pleading. This is the problem. The position that you're taking, Adam, it is very, very problematic. Because first of all, I specifically told you, please don't bring all of the scholars that you named. I know most of these guys, and I wish Wissam was here, right? Because he was the right person to actually, talk to about this, right? But all of these guys, most of these guys that you've quoted to me, they are not source critics. Because Adam, stop shaking your head. I just showed it to you. I just showed it to you because the same way you're not going to appeal to Robert Price, or you're not going to want me to appeal to Robert Price for the existence of Jesus, right? I would ask you not to appeal to this guy for something that he's not specialized in. Yes, I'm not saying that we will disregard his position altogether, but this is why I told you, Adam, that critical, or textual criticism, source criticism, right? And whatchamacallit. And if you have a theologian writing about this particular topic, those positions, they're weighed differently. I'm not saying that they're now going to be taken serious, right? But when it comes to source criticism, this guy is not a source critic. I will never take this guy's word over a source critic. No way in heck are you ever going to convince me to take this guy's position over a source critic. And as I said, for every one of these guys, theologians that you bring me, I will bring you 5. So then again, your position will be weaker then. That's what I'm trying to point out to you. Because trust me, Adam, I know you're shaking your head, But like, if I were to ask you unanimously, if I were to quote you 10 different scholars, right, renowned scholars, right, what do you think their position is when it comes to the attribution of the names of the New Testament Gospels? Can you tell me what their position is?
No, as I said originally, look, it's a divided field. There's a number of scholars that have one view, and there's a number of scholars that have a different view. But the scholars that I named are highly regarded within theological academia. They're regarded as critical because of how they engage with the research. Like if you look at, for example, the work that D.A. Carson did on Matthew and John in terms of what he appeals to and how he goes through his research, there's a reason why his work, alongside the other guys that I mentioned, is subscribed to actual theological students and those who are studying critical scholarship within academia, because he is highly regarded. He's not regarded as some like random guy that's just writing books, for his own agenda. Like he is highly regarded among the other guys that I mentioned. But that's fine. Look, that's fine. I don't want to go around in circles over the scholarship.
No, Adam, this point is actually important, because for us to get somewhere in regards to this particular topic, you can disagree with me, I can disagree with you. That's not my issue. But you're doing exactly what I, with all due respect, what I asked you in the email not to do after we had our first conversation, because I knew it would take this route. Because it's not the first time I'm having this conversation with Christians regarding scholarship, right? Because when you actually bring me somebody that specializes in hermeneutics, hermeneutics and theology, and you appeal to him for source criticism, I don't know where to go from there then. Because like with all due respect, then I don't take that argument serious. Look, I specifically told you that we need to go to, but anyways.
They're regarded as critical within academia. If you don't want to accept it, that's fine. That's all I'm saying.
None of them are source critics. That's what I said. Again, I will ask you one last time before we can move on. If not, it's okay, right?
No, we can
have
just
any
move on.
source critics?
I don't want to go around in circles. We can just move.
So basically, we don't have any source critics claiming what you're claiming, and that's the point that I wanted to establish. Right now, let's move to the next topic, because we don't have much time. Right? You asked about
the
Muslims.
question. Like I would like the question. Yeah.
That's fine. So I was coming to that. Right? So just to sort of sum up, we don't have a body, we don't have any primary source material, right? And we don't have any eyewitnesses, right? So the Quran stands correct when it mentions that it is just conjecture, which you just proved, right? You can disagree, you can shake your head all you want, no problem with me, right? We can agree or disagree, shake our hands, move on, no problem. But it strengthens the position of the Quran when we ask you guys for primary source material, eyewitnesses, and you guys are not able to provide those, right? Now, you asked about Muslims, right? Now, what do you understand by the term Muslim? Can you please tell me?
Well, my understanding would be it has to do with someone who submits their will to God.
Exactly. So when you look at, I will appeal to your Bible, obviously, because obviously I can't appeal to the Quran, and we don't have any extra biblical sources that you would actually accept that you want me to appeal to, right? So I would have to, unfortunately, in this case, appeal to the Bible that is part of your canon, right? So when you look at verses like John 4:34, right, where he says that he is there not to do his own will, but the will of somebody that sent him, right? That would linguistically be a Muslim. So was he a Muslim from that aspect? Yes, he was. As all prophets before him were. Sorry?
The author of John is a Muslim?
No. I said I'm referring to what he's talking. We don't even know who the author of John is, with all due respect, right?
I know, but he's not a Muslim.
Talking about that, right? But again, did he submit his will to one God?
He's talking.
Yes or no?
Fawad, you're talking about Jesus, peace be upon him, and not John. It's
yes.
It's where
I
Jesus
understand.
Exactly.
I know. But the reason I raise that point is because when we look at stuff, when we look at the Gospels critically, for example, I'm doing my thesis on Matthew. My perspective is, and this is how we have to engage with the Gospels, is what does the author mean by this? Because the author is writing it for a particular audience with a particular agenda in mind, right? So in other words, who does the author of John, I believe he's John, if you don't want to believe he's John, that's fine, but who does the author of John view Jesus to be, right? And then we have to try and unpack what he's saying in light of that, because he's portraying Jesus in a particular way for a particular reason. So that's the point. So when I look at all these verses, it's within a particular theological context, particularly for John because of the nature of his Christology and how it differs to, for example, the Synoptics. I would say it's pretty similar. It's just he takes it to a different level, let's just say, in terms of the explicit as opposed to the implicit, where it's more implicit in the Synoptics. But again, that's a whole separate discussion where where you'd have to go into all the references, and that would just take too much time.
Okay, so again, I will come back to my same question, right? Did Jesus submit his will to one God, yes or no? According to John 4:34.
Well, the will of the Father is also the will of the Son.
According to this particular passage, when he says that I'm here to do the will of the Father, he is not saying that he is there to do his own will. As a matter of fact, there are contrary verses where he says that even before you sent me, right? Before you sent me, I came here to this earth to do your will. He never refers to his own will. He always unanimously refers to the will of the Father, as in John 4:34 he says, right? Then John 5:30, he says what? By myself I can do nothing. I judge only as I hear, and my judgment is just, for I seek not to please myself, but him who sent me. So anybody that does anything for the pleasure of God, he's a Muslim, linguistically speaking. Because a Muslim is someone who believes in one God, he believes in his angels, he believes in the prophets before him, he believes in the day of judgment, that everybody will be accountable for their actions in this world. They believe that God is in control of what's going on in the entire universe. So in that sense, Jesus was a Muslim. He's much closer to what the three people on the panel with you are doing versus what you're doing. Because he did not believe in the Trinity. He did not believe in the death of resurrection to be the way of atonement for salvation, right? And he did not believe in pretty much anything that, he did not eat pork. He was circumcised. He was a Jew, pretty much everything. And he was a monotheist, right? He gave charity. All the 5 pillars of Islam, by the way, Jesus, he went by those. Those are the 5 pillars of Islam. He prayed, he fasted, he gave charity, right? Those are the pillars of Islam. He made pilgrimage to Jerusalem, right? Which was the pilgrimage focal point at that time. So when I actually look at even your own Gospels, and I look at the life of Jesus, not somebody decades later, portraying their theology anachronistically, then looking at Gospels. No, when I actually look at the life of Jesus, even when I look at the red lettered Bible, I see Jesus as somebody that submitted to one God. He prayed, he fasted, he did everything that a Muslim would be doing. He's circumcised. The complete opposite of what Christians are doing, right? So I want you now, the burden of proof would be on you to show me where Jesus is doing everything that Christians are doing these days, be it believing in Trinity, be it believing in death and salvation, death and resurrection for salvation, any of those. I don't see any of those.
Yeah, and Adam, remember that what Fawad has mentioned, it's Jesus' own words according to the text that has been written down, right? They're quoting Jesus. If that wasn't the case, if it was someone else's understanding or impression of what Jesus was saying, maybe we would have probably not brought it up. This is quoted as this is what Jesus said to the people. All right. Now, remember, if you're going to present evidence that is equal to refute this, not what someone else is saying, what Jesus said in the Bible. Go to the red letter Bible, bring out the red letter words, and show us how Jesus is proving to you that you should be believing in the Trinity, that he died for your sins, and that that your salvation is dependent on him dying for your sins.
Or him actually believing in something like this. Because remember, what Adam asked us is that prove to me that how Jesus was a Muslim. So when I look at his life, I see 100% everything that a Muslim is doing. And pretty much not even 10% of what Christians are doing, what they believe in. The way they worship, the way they live their lives, the type of God they believe in, method of salvation, everything. I don't see Christians. I live with a Christian right here at my home. I've got family members. I can't even remember or recall the last time that they fasted. We fast every Ramadan. Sure, Jesus fasted for 40 days, right? We fast for 30 days. But he did it every year, just like how the Jews do. We see Jesus putting his forehead on the ground when praying, in the Garden of Gethsemane, right? We see all the prophets in the Old Testament praying the exact same way, right? Be it Moses, Aaron, all the Old Testament prophets, David, Solomon, all of them. I can quote you Old Testament verses. Show me which Christian does that. I don't see a single Christian doing that. I've never seen a Christian on their foreheads to the ground.
Do you want me to respond?
Sure.
Again, we only have 13 minutes left. I mean, if you want, we can do a whole stream on that where we go through the actual way in which Jesus portrays himself in the Gospels. I have no problem doing that. But that's a longer stream because we're then going to have to go into each individual verse, and we're probably going to end up spending 10 minutes on per verse. I don't think there's point in doing that now. But to answer your question, yes, those things are present. Like, I'll give you an example, right? Can I be, for example, divine and also be a Muslim? Can I view myself as divine and be a Muslim? Can I also, for example, view myself as the future judge that will come to judge the living and the dead and be a Muslim? You see, there's, again, we'll go through, if you want, we can go through these things on a separate stream where we have more time to do it. But there's a lot of context here. Like the original point I made in regards to John is, who does John view Jesus to be? Sorry, who does the author of John view Jesus to be? Because that is part of, you have to factor that in when you're reading what he's writing, because he has a particular agenda behind the things that he's saying, right? Because he perceives Jesus to be a certain way, right? So when scholars look at John's gospel and they unanimously come to the conclusion that John views Jesus as God in some sense, there's a reason for that. It's based on the wealth of what he writes about Jesus in terms of, now you can say, like, again, we can get into those verses and you can say that those verses are interpolations and whatever, but that's a whole separate argument in and of itself. And I can do the same with the synoptics as well. Like, I'll give you an example. In regards to prayer, when Jesus talks about prayer in the synoptics in Matthew chapter 6, he talks about an intimate prayer between him and the Father. And he projects that onto us, that we are to view God as our Father, as an actual Father, and we are actually his children, spiritually speaking, and that we have that dynamic, that relationship. And that same relationship is given through him. The access to that is given through him. That's the way in which the gospel writers themselves seem to, anyway, at least perceive the transcendent, because that's why when they apply the criterion of dissimilarity, for example, to Jesus, they do unanimously agree that Jesus used the term Abba when referring to God, which means dad, basically. And that brings into question, like, why he was saying that. Because when I was talking to Yemeni, for example, Yemeni mentioned that that principle was given by Jesus, but then it was abused. But the question is if it was given by Jesus, why give it in the first place if it's going to end up being abused? It doesn't make sense. If Allah knows that this thing is going to end up being abused, why give it? Why make that allowance even to begin with? But yeah, as I said, there's only like 10 minutes left, so this is a longer discussion in and of itself.
So yeah, Adam, if I could just respond to that, just some of those things that you said, I would say.
Can I just add a very quick thing, because I noticed something there? So, Adam, either John could be a historical document that is portraying the truth about Jesus, or it can be something that you're mentioning here, where it's a portrayal of Jesus which is not necessarily true, because you're basically assuming in this when you're mentioning this, that what John is quoting Jesus as saying isn't necessarily truly what Jesus is saying. It's just a portrayal of how John wants to view Jesus. It doesn't matter what the real Jesus was. This is just what John wants to view Jesus as. If that is the case, it just breaks apart the whole idea of this being a historical document.
But
And
I was
in regards
I was
to
gonna
go ahead, sorry, yeah, go ahead,
no worries, no worries.
Ali.
I was gonna add that I think this approach, which I would agree with you that we are gonna have to tackle this at a future time because for the sake of time. But I would say that the approach or the mindset that you're having, I would I would question its efficiency or its credibility, and I'll tell you why. You're in a sense you're saying believe the narrative rather than investigate if the narrative is true, because what you're saying is that you should be viewing the words of Jesus within what the person who is speaking, whatever his agenda is. That's how we should automatically just take it, rather than question if his agenda is even true, is even correct. Because you're saying that, well, according to the context, we should view it the same way I hear a lot of Christians say, view the whole context as a whole or the whole narrative as a whole. Well, that's problematic, and I'll tell you why. And if even just looking at examples of a crime scene, if you see every crime scene as a narrative taking place. Let's say it's a murder crime scene, and we want to see every crime scene is a narrative. Using that same understanding that you have, people will a lot of crimes people will be going to prison for the wrong things, or the wrong culprits will be going to prison, or and a lot of crimes would not be able to get fully solved because people would just say, well, what's the narrative that someone is giving here? Because there have been so many crime scenes where the actual culprit is trying to manipulate it to see it as either a suicide or as like someone else did it, as trying to frame someone else. They would try to manipulate that crime scene to make it seem like it's. So what do detectives do? Detectives, which being great at the ones who are great at their work, they examine the crime scene. They try to understand what the narrative is, but they don't just stop there. They continue and investigate each shred of evidence within the evidence to see if it actually goes with the narrative. So, what are they doing? They're questioning if this narrative is even true. That's not what I see you doing. So, and what happens? When the first crack the, that they see, the first inconsistency that they see, now what do detectives do? They start questioning the whole narrative. All they need is one issue, one inconsistency, one little fact, one little evidence that goes against what the narrative is trying to portray. Now they're questioning the entire narrative, which is what you're supposed to do. Unfortunately, Adam, I don't necessarily see you doing that, at least not based upon what you have communicated, because you're saying that each and every single message, each and every single word of the Bible, of the gospel, we should take it within the agenda of how the author is trying to portray it as. That's problematic, especially because you would never know what's true or what not true. All you go, which is goes back to the idea of special pleading. You're saying, well, whatever they believe in, we have to look at it in regards of whatever they believe in. But the problem is, the one big flaw of this is because this is not just a theological book. This is also, at least what you're claiming it to be, a historical book. You cannot go along with theological mindset if you're trying to look at something historically. You can't do that. That's that's actually the reason why a lot of New Testament authors actually would say historically it doesn't add up historically. In order to have that understanding, you'd have to be looking at it in a theological mindset rather than historical mindset. And even theological mindset, you still not quite. And this is what we're talking about. We're talking about being using reason and using being open minded. Question the narrative, because the evidence that the person is trying to portray within his narrative could actually prove why his narrative should not be the case. What we're asking to do is just question the narrative the same way how a detective would question a crime scene, and one little inconsistency, now they have to say, well, this crime scene, someone's trying to is, and what did they conclude? They conclude, well, someone's trying to frame someone else, someone's trying to manipulate us. That could very well have been the same thing according to the gospel. According to the gospels, someone may have tried to manipulate the narrative to make you believe that this is what the story goes. How would you know that? What process would you take to know and to discern from deception? How would you know you're not being deceived? That's an issue objectively, rather than just special pleading and wanting the text to say according to what you wanted to believe, which I understand that's a matter of belief. But when it comes to figuring out the truth, we have to look past that and actually humble ourselves to say this could be the wrong narrative.
And
Yeah, I
you
mean,
know,
my
go ahead, Adam. Sorry.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
I just want to say that, like, so when I talk about my approach, that, like, the approach that I'm taking there when I do that, that's the academic approach for critical scholarship. That's how they deal with the Gospels critically. They look at it from the perspective of what the author has in mind when he's saying this, the intended audience, all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying that that's my, view. I just do that for the sake of academic research because I have to. I can't look at it conservatively and sit there and be like, oh, well, I want it to read this way, I want it to read that way, and insert my own interpretation, because I have to be critical in my exegesis. That's just what I meant by that.
Okay. Well,
my view obviously is that John wrote John, and that he is a witness, and that what he gives is his understanding of the historical events as he saw them unfold. That's my view. But when I'm looking at things critically, from a scholarship standpoint, if I'm, like, as I said, my thesis is on Matthew, the angle that I have to take, and this is the academic angle. I'm not the one forcing this angle. This is the angle that's forced by academia within theological studies. Is if you want to do a critical analysis of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, what they tell you is you have to understand who the author believes Jesus to be, and the context within which he's saying these things, and for whom, to which audience or whatever. You factor all these things
there we
account
go.
to get the most objective understanding you can of what he's saying about what he's saying. So, sorry, that's what I meant. If it was
okay. So academically, who do a majority of New Testament scholars academically say? Do they say the person, the author of John? Do they actually say that's the disciple John, or do they say it's anonymous academically?
It depends. It's, as I
No,
said,
I'm saying a majority. I'm not saying there could be either. I'm saying the majority of New Testament scholars. Do they say? I'm not saying all of them. I'm saying the majority. Do they say that the Gospels are anonymous writers, anonymous authors, or do they say Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John majority wise, academically?
I mean, that's a tough question to answer. I wouldn't say it's a majority. I would say it's fairly split. 50, 60, 40. I mean, we could go through those scholars and name.
No, but if you say,
that's my perspective.
But here's the problem. If you say 60-40, that's not split. That's majority. Even if you go 50.1, that's still the majority.
I know it's a majority, but I wouldn't consider that.
And that's what I'm.
Hang on. So the claim is that the 60% claim that they're not anonymous.
No, I didn't. No, I meant the other way.
He said, yeah.
Oh, it's the other way.
And that's exactly what I'm saying. That's still a majority.
Even then, the odds are against you. Even if it were split, see, this is the problem, Adam, because this is your salvation you're talking about. So half the people are telling you one thing, half the people are telling you something else. I mean, well, you should be agnostic about the issue, but you are, and you yourself admitted that you think it's 40, and I think even that's a stretch. But I'm not going to get into that point because, as I said, critical scholarship, source criticism, total different science, right? Because a lot of people, they just get mesmerized with this term. Oh, it's a scholar. Scholar of what though, right? But just one thing before you go, and we can.
But one thing I would point out just before you get to your point.
Yeah, sure.
Like the thing with the 60%, I mean, the majority of that 60%, they don't believe, they're either agnostic or atheist. They don't have any fundamental belief in God at all, and that affects their analysis of history and research. I'll give you an example, right? When it comes to, I'll just quickly finish the point.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I just want to quickly finish the point. Like when it comes to dating, for example, right? So the way in which things are dated from a scholarship standpoint is they date them after the prophecy has taken place. So if there's a prophecy in a book, an atheist will be like, well, they couldn't have prophesied that because I don't believe in prophecy. I don't believe in any of that stuff. Therefore, I'm going to date it to after because that's the only way to reconcile that fact. That's what you see with scholarship in general. But obviously, I do
not really. So, Adam, with all due respect, you're way off on scholarship. Yeah,
there was
but again, this is something that we can put this on the back burner for now, because as I said, we don't have enough time. And I just wanted to make one point, because you brought that up several times, and Christians, they bring up this point again and again, right? About about God not being referred to as Father, right? The fact
And
that the
so
terminology.
Fuad, if I may just say, so I do
Yes.
apologize for
Yes.
interrupting, but Adam, when you say that even those majority of scholars, they're not that's in a way that's trying to dismiss their credibility. When you say, well, of course they'd say this because they're not Christian.
Would you say they're credible
No,
when they talk about the Quran?
I'm saying, if there are New Testament scholars,
Absolutely.
yes,
Absolutely.
I'm saying,
I will appeal to atheist scholars when you ask me about the source criticism of Quran.
yeah,
How
I
about
mean
that?
the religion. See, and this is where we
I'm
don't.
not gonna. I'm
And this,
not gonna. Because you see, you have to look. I did not tell you that they cannot be Christians. See, it's a total straw man of our position,
Yeah, no, I
right?
understand.
We told you. I not once did I mention that it has to be an atheist or a Christian. I said it has to be a reputable source critic, right? I don't care. He could believe in he could be a pastor for all I care, right? I want to look at the material that he's providing, the dissertations, the thesis, the books that he has written. It should be based on the field that he specializes in. This is a total different science. As I said, we will discuss this, right? But what I wanted to get to is this particular point that you
Fuad,
mentioned several times.
Fuad,
Yeah.
I wasn't finished, my man.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry,
No, but Ali, if
just
you
30 more seconds.
if
Just
you
30 more
go
seconds.
on the scholarship thing,
No. I'm
we're
saying
not
no.
gonna be able to wrap up.
No. I'm saying it's just a word of caution. Word of caution next time, and you basically just alluded to it because, I would say when you say that they're not Christian, that you're in unintentionally dismissing all of their works, all of their expertise that they're doing by just saying, well, obviously he would say that because he's not a Christian. No, if someone who's an atheist but he's still a well-renowned source critic on the New Testament, of he still is credible. I can't say, well, this person is a New Testament scholar, but he just so happens to be an atheist, so I can't listen to his expertise. The same thing with the Quran as well. If someone is a scholar on the Quran, on the Hadith, if someone is actually a scholar, an expert on that, he just so happens to be an atheist. If he's an actual scholar, and well, yeah, he holds authority. So I can't dismiss by saying, oh well, he's not Muslim, so obviously I can't.
No. I don't completely
So yeah,
dismiss
and
them.
then this is just what I'm saying, but I don't want to take too much because I know you have to go. But Fuad, you can go ahead. That's what I wanted to
Yeah,
allude to.
I just wanted to touch upon this point that Christians bring up all the time, and I don't blame Adam for bringing this up, right? See, Adam, the fact is, the way I look at it, I'll give you my perspective on it, right? The fact that this terminology, son of God or children of God, is completely forbidden in Islam. Again, for me personally, if you were to ask me, it makes a case for Islam rather than against it. Because Islam unapologetically went contrary to the cultural norms of the 6th and 7th century Arabia and most of the Eastern and Western religions of the time, where the concept of children of God was very common. Just as Islam unapologetically stopped polytheism and so many other things, right? It, in most religions, they had these ideas. So Christianity was actually not a unique one. Christianity fits in perfectly in the antiquity.
But do you know? Just like an interesting question. Do you know what the
Mhm.
shift in perspective is within Christianity from Judaism in regards to God as Father?
Yes, I do, and that's my next point, right? So just as tribalism, usury, the usage of alcohol in various religions, religious practices, it was common. Islam did not care about that. Islam said, bam, it's forbidden. And I will tell you why that was, right? If calling God referring to God as Father, if it's such an important deal that you guys make it out to be, right? First of all, there are a handful of instances. Most of them are actually, look at Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 1:1, Mark 1:2. Even the one that we mentioned in the beginning, the one that Jesus referred to as begotten Son of God, right? The term begotten Son of God, it's actually not used in the entire New Testament for Jesus at all. Point number one. Mark 1:1, the earliest gospel refers to Jesus as son, forgery. Look it up. A lot of the earliest manuscripts, they don't have this terminology, right? So you can actually tell that it's been forced in the narrative, right? And the point that I was trying to make is, if it's such an important deal that you guys make it out to be, why is it that not a single major prophet like Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jacob, Isaac directly refer to God, directly when they are praying to God, refer to God as the Father? Why is it that we don't find Moses ever referring to God as a father? Why is it that we never see Noah referring to God as the Father? Why is it that we never see Abraham referring to God as a father directly when they're praying? And we have so many instances.
This kind of proves something in Matthew, but anyway, we can get into that.
No, but again, you're appealing to the New Testament, right? Because if we're talking about the narrative continuing from Judaism, right? Because this idea came from where? From Judaism, right? So why is it that never in the Old Testament you see any major prophets referring to God as Father?
There are a number of verses. I mean, we can go into those.
But do any of the major prophets refer to God directly as the Father? Does Abraham refer to God as the Father directly when he's praying? Yes or no?
So the way it's used in the Old Testament, it's used metaphorically, whereas with Jesus, it's used, not metaphorically. It's analogous in the Old Testament. In the
analogous.
Jesus,
This is the problem. But the term, look, I will make it very simple. In the 613 commandments, is God referred to as the Father, or is there any commandment where that instructs Jews to refer to God as the Father?
No.
There you go. So it's not that big of a deal for
but
me.
But it is a big deal, because in the Old Testament he exegetes himself to the people as a father, and we can go to those verses, and then we can look at how Jesus interprets.
He also exegetes himself to be a pregnant woman. You know that, right? God is also referred to as the husband. Those are all metaphorical terms. But when the prophets, they were praying to God, they never referred to God, you are my husband, oh my husband, save me, or do this or that, right? That's the point that I'm trying to make, right? God is referred to as so many things, as a mother, as literally a pregnant mother that is in pain, in labor, right? Can you even consider a prophet referring to God as a pregnant, screaming mother in labor? No, you will take that as a metaphorical term. So I'm saying take this as a metaphorical term, and that's where Islam and Christianity, Judaism, they go apart as well, because these are the attributes that don't befit the creator of this universe, because these are human attributes. And that's the point that I was trying to make, that you get this in all of these Eastern and Western religions, these pagan religions, where these types of terminologies were used. Because remember, the Jews, like the brother said, the Jews, they don't have the same understanding as a son of God terminology as the Christians have. Christians have it very different, especially when it comes to Jesus, right? And let's say, even if it were allowed, right, from God to use this terminology, you know why it was abrogated? In the last and final religion of God, which we claim to be Islam.
Yeah, that's the thing I don't understand, because in the context,
I'll explain to you. I'll explain to you. Do you believe Jesus is the Son of God? Yes or no?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Do you believe that Jesus is God?
Yes, absolutely.
And this is why it was abrogated, because you guys totally turned it into a literal or another type of sonship that the Jews did not understand. If I were to bring a Jew over here, they would never attribute this to the Messiah or any prophets the way you guys give this type or use this type of terminology for the Messiah, right? Hosea 2:16, it says clearly, in that day declares the Lord, you will call me my husband. You will no longer call me my master, or in some translations it says Baal. So Baal was one of the names that was abrogated in Hosea 2:16, just like so many other things were abrogated. But you talked about name, that it did not make sense to you in your Bible. With all respect, you see, this is the problem with you guys. You guys don't study, because if you actually study, there are many things that God abrogated for that reason, because it was being misused. Baal was one of the names that was misused. And you know why it was abrogated? For that same reason, because of the cultural pagan practices that Jews started attributing to God, right? Be it the sacrifices and whatnot, right? So God actually abrogated it all the way, and said that you're never going to refer to me as Baal anymore. Did he accept it previously? Yes, he did, but he abrogated it later on. So same thing he could do with the Son of God, because when I see you guys referring to Jesus as the Son of God, I see it clearly why, and then at the same time you guys call him God. I see clearly why God abrogated it. Because if he did not intend it to be used this way, and you guys started using it this way, as almost all of the pagan religions use it, right? And I don't mean pagan in a derogatory sense, right? But I mean all the non-Jewish religion. Let's term it that way, right? Be it the Eastern, be it Chinese, be it in Arabia, because you know that the Arabians, they actually refer to their deities as Allat and Uzza, for instance. They refer to them as the children of God. The
Daughters
Quran
of God.
specifically says, sorry? Yeah, the
Daughters
daughters of
of God.
God, exactly.
Yeah.
Daughters of God, right? So, I mean, this is a cultural practice that was even there in Arabia. The Quran unapologetically says, you can't say that anymore. Halas.
Yeah. So so the thing that I was getting at, the point that I was getting at, is that, you remember when I asked you about the shift between Judaism and Christianity in regards to how Jesus teaches this, right? The difference between it being analogous in the Old Testament and then it becomes a form of direct address through Jesus. Now that goes back to the historical Jesus with the criterion of dissimilarity. You can look into it in your own time. Scholars are unanimous on that he used the term Abba, and that he taught his followers to refer to God as Father. And it's in a familial sense. It's in this deep personal familial sense that he actually is a cosmic parent. Now, like, the thing I don't understand is, okay, you can say they twisted it because of their view of the sonship of Christ, right? And then as a result of that, he abrogated it. But if he foreknows all things, why would he allow Jesus to introduce this teaching, which he then would have to abrogate later if he knew they were going to abuse it in the first place? That's what I don't understand.
So,
See,
for
Adam,
you to actually make that claim, you would have to
that's
prove
actually
that Jesus actually
oh,
said that.
Look at the
and on top
scholarship. Look at the scholarship on it.
and
Okay, go ahead, Ali.
so
Go
I
ahead.
was gonna say, Adam, if you want to say, well, why would God let this happen? That's opening a can of worms, because if you start getting to the point where you're saying, why would God let this happen? You're trying to get into the mind of God, because then you can say, why would God let this happen? Why would God let Adam and Eve eat from the tree? Why would God let this happen? Why would God? If you start from one area by asking yourself, why would God let this happen?
No, I'm
You
talking
can
about
do that with
faulty
almost
teaching.
anything.
I'm talking about faulty
No,
teaching. That's different.
so even when it comes to the idea, see,
But Akhi, we gave him the answer. Hosea 2:16. God abrogated a name that he permitted before, but he abrogated. So what would you say to that? Why did God abrogate this particular name?
Which name?
Hosea 2:16, the reference that I gave you.
By the way, do you believe in progressive revelation or no?
Kind of.
Kind of. Okay.
1 second, I'm just getting this up.
And there are tons of other examples I could give you that things that were actually
Sorry, I'm just
told by God for Israelis to do. Yeah, that's fine. But like, they were given so many different commandments, so many different laws that they had to do at the time of Moses, for instance, that God abrogated later on.
Okay, I'm gonna have to check it later because I want to look at the Greek on it. Because I have
This
a critical
is in
Greek.
the Old Testament. This is in the Old Testament. So if you
I
actually
know,
see
but I use the Septuagint.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. You can take a look at that.
So we'll actually I'll write that down and we can discuss that next time.
Yeah, sounds good, Adam. Adam, it was a pleasure talking to you.
I will answer everything. I just want to take it down.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Adam, the thing is, these interfaith dialogues, even though they might get heated at times, there's absolutely no ill feeling towards you. You're always very respectful, and this is one of the reasons why we love having you on. Brother Yemeni, he likes having you on. We always say this, that you're very respectful, and please continue to be that way, right? But sometimes you have to this is just an advice, a personal advice that I'll give you, right? That you have to put your biases aside, because I do understand when it comes to faith, we always want to justify it by hook or by crook. We always justify it, right? And another just piece of advice that I'll give you, and this is just not criticism, this is just a brotherly advice, like I'll give to like my younger brother. Okay, I consider you a brother in humanity, right? You appeal to scholarship way too much, because at the end of the day, you have to remember, Adam, that these are just human beings giving their opinions, right? Sometimes we have to use our God-given wit, right? Where we just see, okay, let me weigh it out myself. I don't have to appeal to a PhD scholar for every single thing, because if that were the case, I mean, which prophets were PhD scholars? None of them, right? What I see is just too much reliance on scholarship on your part. Because even briefly when I heard you talking on Brother Yemeni's channel, I mean, look, appealing to scholarship is good, but it could also lead you astray in a land that it can lead you in a rabbit hole, right? Where there's just, because there are all kinds of scholars, they have all kinds of opinions, right? So which one is true, which one is not true, but that's all I'll leave it at. And please, just if you want, we'll give you a last word if the brothers want to add something in there, because I think I talked a lot. My apologies, guys, as usual.
No, all fine.
Oh, sorry,
Adam,
go ahead.
If you want to take the last word, that's I think that would be fair to you. I just want to say this, that at the end of the day, there's a conception of God that you can come to without appealing to any of these scriptures, right? You, me, anyone in the middle of the Amazon, in Indonesia, whoever it is, we all have this conception of God that we can arrive at without anyone telling us who God is. And when you analyze that that conception of God, you would realize that the biblical God that you are ascribing to is not that God, is not the eternal deity that we all believe is perfect, that we all believe is in control of everything, that we all believe is capable of doing what they want, right? Is all knowledgeable, all of those attributes that we ascribe to God. So when you look at the idea of Jesus being the Son of God or God, right, it goes against that. And what we're asking you to do is basically question yourself. Why am I actually believing in something when the information coming to me is from these individuals who are ignoring in their studies, they're ignoring that anything can come from God? That's the underlying assumption of academia. You have to ignore that something could come from God to basically do your PhD, do your master's, right? And you're putting your faith in these individuals, right? If Jesus was here, he would fail in every PhD exam because this peer review, he would be thrown, all of his papers would be thrown out. Okay? So I just want you to realize that when it comes to salvation, if it comes to your studies, your academia, go ahead, do whatever you want. But when it comes to salvation, it's important to realize the truth and not what academia is portraying as the truth.
Jazakallah khair. Ali, you want to add something in there?
No, I give my time to Adam.
All right. Go ahead, Adam. The floor is all yours.
Look, I really appreciate you guys taking the time because, like, obviously, I have a lot of questions, and like it's difficult from the perspective of someone that does look at things historically, right, and looks at the evidence, okay, to kind of contend with certain things, that are in the Quran as well as other stuff. That I hope that if we continue these dialogues, we can get on to some of the other stuff as well, because I would rather hear your honest perspective on certain things than obviously go to other sources, because the same sources, for example, that say this about the Bible, the stuff that they say about the Quran and Islam is completely different. I hope you wouldn't accept the stuff they say about it. I really do hope you wouldn't. So maybe for the next time we can just delve into some more of those questions. So for me, the ones that often come up, obviously it's the crucifixion question, because that's a big one. You also have, for example,
in the next one, if you want, we can discuss the crucifixion from a secular perspective, not scholarship, but the early Roman sources and whatnot, Josephus, Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, etc. Right?
Yeah.
If you want, we can because we didn't get enough time to delve into those today, right? So we can do that. So I'm noting down the things that you want to talk about. And what else would you like to talk about?
Yeah, I just have 4 things in mind because I'm trying to get through like the misconceptions thing, So that chapter 9, verse 30 of the Quran, it says something like the Jews were worshipping Ezra. Again, I would like to try and understand the historicity behind that, because that in and of itself is a strange claim.
Actually, that's right around my alley, because I think
Okay.
I've explained that several times on different streams. And I can prove even from the Talmud source and everything.
Yeah.
Sure, that's no problem. So there you go. So the Ezra, son of God. Okay.
The other thing then is in regards to the following of the way in which you view prophets. Why you follow them the way that you do, right? Because my perspective is that every human being is inherently sinful, right? And as a result, they're imperfect and they shouldn't be followed in any real meaningful sense, apart from when they show obedience to God, which is a reflection of who God is. And then they give a good example, a good moral example to the world. And therefore, from that, we derive the things which are righteous and good, because it's a reflection of who God is, but not of us innately. But that's just the Christian perspective. So I'm trying to wrestle with why Muslims look to prophets and then say, well, they should be followed, their example. And then in regards to obviously then the final prophet within Islam, the seal, Muhammad, why, in terms of his example, and then contrasting that with, for example, the prophet before him. And the reason I say that is because, again, maybe I'm wrong theologically here, but isn't the Islamic perspective, and I could be completely wrong here, but isn't the Islamic perspective that the prophet which comes after surpasses the one which came before in some sense?
And we do believe that, and we can substantiate that. No worries.
It's the same idea as your progressive revelation, that the revelation that comes after is to be followed.
Yeah. You see, that's a difficult question in of itself, because my perspective is more so that it's, I don't know. That's a difficult question. Well, maybe we'll get to the idea of progressive revelation in the next one, because I have a different kind of take on that. But yeah, so the final question then is just contrasting Muhammad with Jesus, and why he would be viewed as a continuation, let's just say, what came before, and why he surpasses what came before. Something like that. Just something to that effect.
Perfect. Sounds good, brother. So I noted all of these down, and inshallah, I will be in touch with you via email. Right. Yep. Once again, no hard feelings. If I got a little bit loud or I offended you somehow,
No.
my apologies for that. Please accept my
Guys,
apology. Right?
at the end of the day, I understand people are passionate about what they believe, and that passion comes through. I don't hold people being passionate about. If you're truly passionate about something and you love something, of course, you're gonna react in some way to it. So no hard feelings.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. And I'm you've been really, really respectful and good. You've listened in to all we had to say. You've put in some thoughtful questions forward to us as well, and we've had a good conversation overall. And really appreciate you coming to us and asking these questions, allowing us an opportunity to respond to you, right?
Yeah.
Because you could very well do what most of the other people who come on this stream do. Go take a look at one of the Islamophobic channels, look at how they're interpreting it, and come and project that to us, when that's just a straw man of our position, right? So and that's the thing. So there's a lot that can be said about this, and in the end, I do feel that this is a very good source for people to sort of see, okay, you and I can disagree, and we can still have a cordial conversation. Yes, it can get heated because both of us are passionate. You can react to it in your own way. When you disagree, we can react in our own way in how we disagree. But at the end of it, you and I, like we're doing this, we can come down and say, okay, yes, these are our disagreements, but there's so much that we've sort of agreed on, right? And hopefully we've given you enough information for you to take back and mull over and basically say, okay, do I have everything? Was everything that I used to think correct in light of the new perspective that I've been given, right? So and that's hopefully, if we can move past that, that will be a great work as far as this stream is concerned.
Yeah, and just the guys that you're talking about, like those YouTube channels, the kind of Islamic phobic ones. Obviously I'm aware of those guys, and it's though I'm not going to name the guys, but some of them are extremely aggressive and disrespectful in their approach. Like they resort to name calling and all that kind of stuff, which is just not. It's not even the biblical way of how they're supposed to do it. I mean, 1 Peter 3:15 says that when you're having conversations with people, that you're to do it with respect and with love. If you're sitting across from someone and you're just insulting them, it's not, that's not a good discussion as well.
Yeah.
Even if I violently disagree with what you follow and who you believe in, I still have to handle that with sensitivity and with love. It's not, me hanging it over your head and insulting that thing is not the way to do it. And they're just giving a bad example of, what they should be doing.
Yeah, no, thanks for putting this out there.
Yeah.
Brother DeAndre, you just joined us. Do you have anything to say?
Well,
so
this is our younger brother, Adam. I think you spoke to DeAndre before.
I could have maybe on Yemeni stream.
Okay.
I don't know.
No.
I don't think he was on there. Yeah,
No,
he's a young brother. Assalamu alaikum, rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brother DeAndre. Yeah, he's a Hispanic brother, and he accepted Islam with us on Dawah Over Dunya, one of our other channels, in 2023. He was a Catholic before, so yeah.
Yeah, I actually went on because I sent Brother Fuad a message, right? And he told me to clarify what I said, and maybe we can get into this in the future, inshallah, right? That
Inshallah.
You said that when it comes to John 5, where it says that Christ does not enact his own will, but the will of the Father, your response to that is to say that the will of the Father is the will of the Son. But although this is probably going to start like a whole rabbit trail, I actually, Father, you saw, right? I
already pointed that out to him.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Oh, okay, perfect. So I would love to
get into that.
Yeah, no worries. But it's pretty late for you, Adam. So we'll let you go, get some rest, and inshallah we'll continue.
What
Right.
time
And,
would you guys like to start earlier the next time, so maybe we can go longer? I don't know. It's just
Yeah.
I'm being conscious of the time because where I am right now it's 11:30. So, and I try
yes.
to finish up by 10:30.
Okay.
But I don't want to do it too early because I know probably you guys are working as well. I'd hope you're working as well. You know.
Yeah, all of us, we have jobs. Even though I
Yeah.
work from home, so I'm considered a bum here at home.
So maybe
No,
But the
maybe
rest of
around
these people, they work.
maybe 2 EST, but maybe that's too early. I don't know.
I'll be in touch with you because one of the people that I really wanted to bring on board was Brother Wassam, because he's our main guy for patristics, right? So I think he will actually be the best guy to talk about that particular aspect. The rest of them, inshallah, we'll cover with you directly. So I'll be in touch with you. I'll try to do like 3 p.m. EST if we can.
Yeah.
Let's see if he's inshallah available. But we'll be in touch regardless. It'll be a time that's good for you and for us as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, brother. All right, take care.
all right, Adam.
And
Thank
we'll
you.
see you in the next one, man. All right, take care.
So much.
Bye. Good night. You too.